Hey listeners, make sure to check out our 2-week free trial for unlimited yoga, breathwork, and Ayurveda on betteryoga.net.
Hello and welcome. Episode 1 of the Better Yoga podcast. My name is Kari Harendorf. I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner and yoga therapist. And for the first episode, I am honored and privileged to bring to you my teacher, Nevine Michaan, founder of the Katonah Yoga method. Nevine Michaan was born in Egypt in 1954, moved to New York at the age of 3, and in her early 20s, while studying history and comparative religion at Vassar College, she discovered meditation. She understood that there is a function, a formality, and a fit to the universe, and that yoga is a tool, a technique, a practice with repetition, which gives us the opportunity to participate in life with intelligence and joy. If you know Nevine, you know. She is a mystic, a magician, and one of the most generous people on the planet. Nevine started a daily practice in New York City with Alan Bateman, a renowned yoga instructor, in the 70s, and became fully immersed in what would become her life's work. She began teaching yoga in 1980 and founded the Katonah Yoga Center in Katonah in 1986. Nevine, thank you for agreeing to be our first
Thank you. That was
guest.
so nice. I'm so touched.
You are so nice. Katonah Yoga has changed the way I practice and teach yoga. It has been the yoga that I teach pretty exclusively for the last 15 years. Proud to be considered a senior Katonah Yoga teacher and to use this in the yoga therapy model and modules that I teach in and work with small groups and with clients, because it's the yoga that makes people fit themselves. We'll talk a lot about fits and folds and angles as we go on, but I just want to thank you personally for improving my life and the life of so many of my students and clients.
I have to say, yoga works. Yoga works, and really good yoga really works well. And so, yoga is so intelligent, and when you learn good techniques like learning how to play music, eventually you have something, right? So one of my big metaphors, of course, is yoga as music, because I think the body's the instrument, the mind is a musician, and your breath is the spirit moving through that instrument, the tone. So the art really of yoga is knowing how to tune your instrument, how to time your instrument, how to have enough breath to play your instrument. And then comes the great pleasure, because yoga is magical, and it is for magic. And the great pleasure is music soothes you. Music feeds the spirit, right? And well played, then you can play with others. And that is very empowering. So that's why I love doing yoga.
We're going to ask all of our guests, one of the first questions is, what does your practice look like these days? And I know from previous conversations we have is that the practice evolves over time, right? Depending on the season of your life, the season outside. But for you right now, what is your daily practice?
Yes, well, in some ways,
and it doesn't have to be yoga
practice,
right? Because, it can be anything.
It's like, if you're a musician, it's knowing that every day you play your instrument. You play your piano because it gives you joy. So the first thing I get to say is my practices, my yoga practices, give me incredible joy, right? Which is wonderful. One can't ask for more. So I do a big breathing practice, right? Because that is really the most important thing at my time of life, is to be able to modulate my breath, to regulate my breath, to have enough stamina. Because you get older, it's much more about the stamina. So I do a lot of things to build up stamina. I breathe. I play with friends, right? I have to say most of my practice is like open meditation, right? Open eye meditation. It is my life. So I don't really just practice. If I talk about yoga practice, lately I've been going to people's classes, and that is really fun. and special and hard, because even if you know how to do things, you still have to do it. Right. And it's different when I would do a class when I'm 20 than when I'm doing a class when I'm 70. Right. But it's doable. And that is so much fun. So daily, I try to go to a class. I do my own practices at home. And then the rest of my practice is really social, playing with my husband, taking care of my family, cooking, gardening, right? Having a life.
Right.
Yes. And being fortunate and grateful. So I have to say the first thing every morning is I wake up and I'm so grateful.
Right.
I go to bed at night, I'm so grateful. So, yeah.
I have a gratitude practice at the end of the day of, 5 things that I'm grateful for that happened. And, it really does change your life. And you taught me about the drishti of joy and then also the attitude of gratitude. So I don't know if you want to sum that up or not, but for those watching, if you look at any ad that has a clock or a watch on
10
it,
to 2
the time
or
is always
2:10.
set at 2:10.
Right. Yeah, so that drishti of joy. Right.
Exactly. So from 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock is the drishti of
Well,
joy.
it's also
the
your
pitta
windshield
hours
wiper.
of the day for those Ayurveda
So when you're in a car, the windshield wipe will wipe from 10 to 2 and 10 to 2 and 2 to 10. And it's a 60-degree angle. So it is the vantage of an equilateral triangle, which is really the archetype of yoga: strength, structure, stability, mind, body, breath. You're looking at Sri Lanka, you're dealing with 9 equilateral triangles, because its vibration is really that of virtue, victory, right? The V of love. So there's a lot of magic inherently in the geometry, right? But then there's also the narrative and the story. So one of the narratives I like is, if you're driving towards 12 o'clock and you look at your rearview mirror, you're going to see 6 o'clock. And if you're driving towards 1 o'clock and you look at your rearview mirror, you're going to see 7 o'clock. So there's this game of knowing that wherever you're going, if you look at the rearview mirror, you're going to access a very specific memory by virtue of the line of direction. So when you're going to your joy and you finally sort of access it, like say, get out of the woods and see the house you're looking for, or you open the oven door and, the cake is coming out right, you look at your rearview mirror and be so grateful for everything they got you there. Yes. So I think that is very powerful to know that, if you're going the right direction, you'll find your gratitude. Yeah. It will help.
And you'll get where you want to
go. It will
go.
help. I think you have to do everything to get what you want. Right. So I'm a firm believer in that you have to do everything to get anything. That's why one of the biggest tools of yoga, and this is not just Katonah Yoga, but I think Katonah is very good at articulating these concepts in a modern language. But one of the big tools of yoga is that you're powerful when you measure up, right? And that's why you want to bake a cake, you follow a recipe. You want to make something happen, follow the directions, because eventually good form functions, and form is very formal and it measures up. And that's when we do asana. The first trick is to learn how to measure up. If you can do like a tabletop pose, there is a measure. Just like if you went to a restaurant, there is a measure of what a good table would be.
Right. And when I teach table pose, I'll say, if you're going to go antique shopping, you're not going to want to buy a table where the legs are splaying out this way. Right. So look around, and who was that table, and what
and
table
it's very
are you,
powerful to measure up.
And measure
so I
up,
think the
right?
big gift of good yoga is that yoga is designed to develop your siddhis, right? And so a siddha is a power, plural, it's siddhi, siddhi, right? But to develop your siddhis is the goal. It is to develop your power of perception, right? So to really see, does it measure up? And then to know if it doesn't, there's things you can do. And I think that's incredibly powerful too, to realize that it's not a judgment game. It is an informational game. That, right, if I can do this, I can get to that. So then you start learning how to do what it takes to get what you want.
Right. For those listeners, that's like all about the fourth pada, or the fourth section in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, deals with all of the siddhis, all of the powers of eventual, what your
and I
practice
think the big
payoff.
practices in stories will be sort of very magical, but the big practices and the big powers in daily life are also very pragmatic and practical. So one of the greatest siddhas is knowing how to manipulate time, knowing how to make it go quickly when it's hard, knowing how to make it slow when you want it to be slow. So that is a very magical game, to know how to affect time. And time is really played through the breath. So when you're anxious, your breath goes quick. And if you have techniques to sort of calm it down, well, you actually do change the nature of time. So I think that's very powerful.
So powerful. So I just want to dial it back a little bit. Can you talk about, was there a pivotal moment in your life that led to the development of this methodology of yoga, or your personal yoga journey, or what inspired you, or what you saw was lacking?
I didn't see anything lacking. I think much more one day, I mean, I always was out for the mystical experience. So I was always looking for, how do I have mystical experiences in life? And, the problem, if you only have your mystical experiences, or if you have your mystical experiences through altered states, through plant medicines, that eventually that is hard on the body. Plus, when I was studying, that wasn't really the options, right? Most of the options were, how are you going to have mystical experience? And I found yoga, right? So it was a technique that allowed me to be in the presence of the universe, and to be part of, and to feel that I belonged, right? I have to say, though, that one day when I was about 21, I saw a picture of somebody doing Nidrasana, right? And yoga has always been big for thousands of years, but, it became so mainstream maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But when I first started, there wasn't as much material out, except, right, it just wasn't. But I saw this picture of this yogi, right, and he was doing Nidrasana. Nidrasana is like an upside down turtle, right? So it's Buddhist sleep, right? And the beauty of the pose is that the arch of the foot, when you do it right, fits behind the arch of the neck like a hand in a glove. And it is an absolutely beautiful pose, because it's all about the measure and the fit. And I saw that, and I had my epiphany. I said, bodies are designed. The universe is designed, birds fit trees, and bugs fit flowers, and arches of feet fit arches of necks. And that just really spoke to me.
One of the metaphors that I heard a long time ago was that Katonah Yoga makes you fit yourself before you fit other people. And I think that some of the ways in which our culture has gone awry is that we're caring more about fitting others, or fitting other things, before we, goes back to your measuring up and being able to fit ourselves and be well oriented and well organized and well rounded.
I think it is a time game that first you have to fit well with others. Mm-hmm. And then, if you're lucky, having found a way to deal with others, then you get that next place, which is when you get to learn to fit yourself. And that's why generally my yoga is Katonah Yoga. It's not mine, but people have to first fit other yogas. They have to learn and try to fit in. And then it's like, first you have to become literate. You have to go to a classroom, right? And really fit in, right? But then comes the next piece. And that's why I always like the idea that nobody really owns like a technique by only learning one thing. You have to know several different things and put it together, so that eventually you start understanding how you can fit yourself. So I think it's a progressive game, right? I think first, you don't ask children to first individuate. First, you just stick them in the classroom, and then you say, all right, now it's the time to be an individual, right? But yes, I think everyone has to bring everything to the table, right? When I was first learning yoga, it was much more militant, because it was the era of, it was that era, right? And that's why everything has a fashion, like things that you were willing to wear in the 60s or 70s, you would be mortified to put on today, right? So fashions changed, but the fashion of yoga in the 70s and 80s was very militant. It was very rigid. It was very soldiers marching, right? That did not really speak to me because of who I am and because my yoga was not learned communally. So for me, yoga was always a personal practice, right? But eventually I figured out how to play with others by understanding to teach people to be musicians and then play in the orchestra. So when we would do a class, we would conduct the class. It was more to teach people to play together in harmony. So the joy was that each one was playing their instrument.
Right. And so Katonah Yoga integrates different aspects of traditional yoga with Taoist theory and sacred geometry. So can you talk a little bit about the intersection of these? Because I know you talk a lot about, and even on your calendars, which we'll discuss, like things of being like a palimpsest, right? Like you layer things over each other, which is why if you wanted to be certified in Katonah, you have another certification first, and this gets something that's laid over.
Or third or fourth.
Of course. Right. And it's like I say all the time, when a system is smart, when a system works, you can layer it over another system that works, and you'll see the
right.
You'll
so
see
I
that
will
they
start
proof
with
each
like
other,
the first
right?
piece of the question is how do I, in a sense, cross-reference? And I have to say that the world is open source and that everyone's doing the same things. So in that sense, it's like going, I know how to speak English. So if I go into a restaurant that has an English menu, I can read it. I can read it really intimately, and I understand numbers, so I know the prices. So there's literacy that I'm starting with, right? So that literacy is in all these different types of techniques. So sacred geometry, of course, is yoga, right? Yoga is sacred geometry. The sacred geometry of classical Hindu yoga is in the mandalas, right? So yantra yoga is the exact same thing as sacred geometry. But sacred geometry during the time of Pythagoras wasn't called sacred geometry. It was called number worship, right? So there's fashion. Because in a funny way, I just worship numbers. I'm in everybody's menus to see how they're playing with the same material, right? Because once you can really read a Chinese menu, you get to realize, oh, they're offering food because everyone's hungry. Oh, they have prices. Oh, because everyone's paying for everything. So I think the big game is to know how to break code. And once you can break the code of Ayurveda, then you'll see, oh, that code is written somehow in this culture, or that material is written in this culture here. So I tend to be very open source. So that's how I learn, because I study comparative religion. So it wasn't that I was tracked in one direction so much. I have my personal background, spiritual narratives, and then I have community. So in a sense, you bring to the table everything you have. So that's what I do. I bring me to the table. Then I expect people to take what I give, which would be like, here are my recipes, right? And eventually they go off and they change them and they keep the ones that they really love. And then they find out that if they add this ingredient rather than the one that I put in, it tastes even better, right? So yes, that's how I cross-reference everything. Because I don't think anything is new. I don't think anybody comes up with anything. It's just that if you have an open mind, then information can come through. So I have a fertile imagination.
Yes, you do. And a huge part of the practice is the use of metaphors. And this can also go into our conversation of literacy, right? Because once you own a language, you understand the metaphors, right? So in Katonah, you talked about the body as being, the instrument, or using, the whole music paradigm. You also, the body is a house. So the body is a vehicle, right? So how do these metaphors, how do you think these metaphors help students deepen their practice and the understanding of the practice?
Everybody comes to the table with something. So everyone has a lot of skills, right? So they might be struggling in some parts of their lives and some places might be very unsatisfying, but everybody comes to the table with skills or with something, even if it's heartache. So now, if you want to teach them something they know nothing about, the easiest way, in a sense, is to connect it to something they understand. So there was this woman that I was speaking to actually yesterday who's in her 80s, and she's getting depressed because it's hard to get old and her body's falling apart. And we're speaking because I'm sending her a yoga teacher because it's, she needs to, and her daughters have asked for years, and it's time, right? And we were talking, and she asked me, or I said something about meditating, and she couldn't understand what it meant. How do you do? What does that really mean? And she used to be a swimmer. She thinks of herself as a dolphin, right? And we went, well, in the end, what she says, when I do a backstroke and I lie in the water on the back at the ocean with the sun, and she knows how to swim, so she's not going to drown because she's measured up. She has good technique. It's now second nature for her to feel safe lying in that water with the sun overhead. And she put herself in that state of being. So that metaphor allowed her to enter something that would be scary for her. Like at 80, she doesn't want to start being a yogi. She doesn't really want to do yoga, but she wants to have that experience that she had when she could do a backstroke, right? And transcend being 80 or being 12 or, yeah. So, yes, it really was. So I think metaphors
That's
allow
beautiful.
people to find their way in. Yes. And one third of a practice is mind. So I think when a lot of the yoga came through initially in its militancy, the mind that was being taught was not how to tap into the universal mind. It was a very don't think mind, where I think the big magic of mind is that you can use it and you can open it, you know. So body dialogue is for the tenacity of being healthy on the earth, and spirit dialogue is for the capacity of being able to play well with others. But mind's magic is that it can be open. So, yeah, so that's one third of the practice is to open a mind.
Right.
Yes.
And that's what makes it
I have
magical.
tremendous
Different from
respect
any
for
other form.
gym. And, when I see, a lot of the gym postures, because I did not grow up in a gym. I did not grow up in a Western culture that did sports. I just didn't do things like that until I started doing yoga. And then I got good because I'm physically adept, but I wasn't tracked with Title 9 or 9, 11, 10. You're the one that gave girls mandatory sports. That was before my era, right? So, but I have tremendous respect that people go and they want to be physical. They want to feel good. But that next piece of integrating it with your mind and your spirit, I think, it adds magic to the whole thing.
This episode of the Better Yoga Podcast is brought to you by our friends at Banyan Botanicals. Use the code KARI15 for 15% off their amazing Ayurvedic products. That's KARI 15. Don't forget to use the link in our show notes.
Right. And as you famously say, goal of the practice is to not lose your mind while you're in your body.
Yoga was never about the body. Yogis, first of all, were always fierce. So the idea was not that yogis were soldiers. Yogis were very independent because they were working on mediating their siddhas, right, and their powers and their breaths. And so there is something that is very fierce in that whole narrative.
Yeah. So let's talk about the spirit aspect, because you talk about that. Can you talk about the importance of the breath work in the Katonah Yoga method and how it's
metaphor of the body is the vehicle, right? And the mind is the driver, right? And the breath is the gas in the tank, right? And the air in the tires and the window washer fluid and everything that makes it work, right? So, right, once you bring down to that, we can go to any metaphor, it's a house, right, is the structure, but it's not a home until there's life in it, right? And that also includes turning on the electricity, turning on the heaters, opening up the windows. So the life of anything is predicated on the breath. And the beautiful thing about breath is it's autonomic and sympathetic, right? So you can breathe without paying any attention to it, but you can also modulate it, right? And that is very magical. So anybody can change their breath rate. It is very hard to change your kidney rate. It's very hard to change your heartbeat. But breathing, you put a paper bag over your mouth and breathe into it, and you can change your breath rate. So, yeah, and your emotional state is so predicated on your breathing. So that's the background. Then the actual practice itself. When I was very young, I learned lots of different breathing techniques because eventually there's so many different ways to play the instrument. Bateman taught a breath technique that I thought was incredibly intelligent. His practice so intelligent, so I want to talk about it for a second because this is over 50 years ago. Alan taught only one practice, right? And the practice took 2 hours from beginning to end. So it's very similar to like doing an Ashtanga practice or a Bikram practice, is that you had a very set group of postures, and I own them because the first practice you did, you will put in you and you will never forget it. And it was a beautiful practice, right? And what you did in that practice is you always followed a 3-3-3 breath count. So you inhale for 3, you hold your breath for 3, you exhale for 3, and you did that for 2 full hours, right? And so you just ran through the sequence with the breath count like that. And the art of it was as you got better at it, you made the whole game long. So the practice could take 4 hours because all you were doing was lengthening the amount of time you could stay in a pose and in the breath count. Ashtanga came in, it was designed with a different breath count that you started at 2 hours, and then the goal was once you got good at it, you brought it down to 1 hour and 20 minutes because you're building a clip, right? So then you start seeing, oh, you're pacing the breath, you're timing with the breath, and you're, in a sense, being the swimmer in the waters of that breath. So that's how I started with those. I knew a lot of Yogi Bhajan's breathing because Kundalini was big in the 60s. And so, it was available for us in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s to learn that material. And he had some beautiful techniques, right? The practice itself, the mind was not the mind that I would build a narrative thread over. So, that wasn't going to be the narrative I play. But some of those techniques are amazing. So I do a lot of techniques that are designed to tune an instrument. They're all breathing practices, right? To soothe oneself, to breathe like the planet. Yeah. And then I codify them. I put them all down like a little recipe book so that eventually they give you even more techniques. Like, I do one breathing technique, so a very typical Katonah technique that we call the breath of the season, where you inhale for spring, you hold for summer, you exhale for autumn, and then you hold your breath empty for winter. So, it plays with the 4 parts of the breath. Well, I first found that breath in a book that Rudolf Steiner wrote, right? And he got that breath from the Theosophists. Right. So eventually everybody's, you find a recipe, right? Oh, this recipe works for our time, or this recipe is available, or, this is the season for it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, you would open up any breath app or meditation app and it would be the box breath.
But to call it a box breath loses the sight of that when you're inhaling, you're potentiating. When you're holding your breath, you're ripening. When you're exhaling, you're harvesting, right? And then when you're empty, you're getting insight. So yes, and that bumped it up into the mind.
Absolutely. And just that, and just for your listeners and watchers, that is the difference of playing the metaphor, engaging the imagination and threading the mind, making that the narrative thread through the whole practice. So it's not like, let's do a box breath, inhale, pause, exhale, pause. It's
what happens is one forgets that the mystical is incredibly practical. So why not be awed with the most practical?
Yes. Yeah. And from the Panchakosha model, which is what yoga therapy is really based on, it's the breath that's the bridge between the body and the mind. So once you begin to play that, right, like you've said, you learn how to soothe yourself.
Right.
Right. And you play with time. Just like the yogis would say, you were born with a certain number of breaths. So when you can slow the breath down, it becomes your longevity practice. And now everything is proven. All the ancient, what the rishis saw and felt and knew in their meditation, science is now proving
How
again and
do
again.
you then copy the recipes? Because you're never going to copy it today the way they were written 1,000 years ago, right? In the same way that today you wouldn't make a donut, right, without the oven. You wouldn't copy. You have different utensils, different ingredients, different, sort of boundaries, but you're looking for the same product to come out. So it is really about knowing how to adjust recipes so that they're available today. Because otherwise they just become precious. Yes, I use all the dishes I'm not
The
supposed to
dishes
use.
you never use.
Right. Yes, that's right. Use all your china,
Use the
all your
good
silver.
dishes.
Right. Let all get tarnished because, why not? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When we do our spring and fall cleanse,
Love
we tell
that.
our participants, like,
Right.
take out the good china, because you're eating the same thing 3 meals a day for
Right.
5 days or 7 days. Like, change it up. Use the things. Make it your own that way.
That's so
Play with
smart.
that variety, since the
Yes.
diet is very
Yes,
bland,
right. Yes, right. This is why it's powerful to be healthy, because I know when I'm well, I can be creative. I know when I'm well, I can find my way out. I can think of using dishes for bland food, right? When I'm not well, I don't think well. So it's a hard game, which one comes first. And that's why probably sometimes one and sometimes the other. And so there's this thing of, self-reflection alone, then working with others. And that's why spiritual narratives are communal. When you go very deep, you can be very soulful. That's personal. But to build spirit is really a communal narrative, right? So when I think of the 3 floors of the body, I think the bottom floor is the floor of flora and fauna and, agriculture and toil and earth and embodiment. But the second floor, which is the floor of spirit and handling and the breath, is the playing field, right? So that's why you have to know there's sort of like the field of toil, and there's a playing field, and then there's the mind field. And yes, well, I think today the world is open source, so one can access so much in the mind field. Then one has to also know how to play, and one also has to know how to work. And if you put it all together, you have a good chance that you won't lose your mind. Yeah. So we all work for that. So, one has to work in so many different modalities, but the goal eventually is to have it all measure up so that you can have a good life. That's the goal. Yeah. So I have a thought on that, so I'm going to say it because I've been thinking about this a lot. In Ayurvedic stuff and in Sanskrit, they talk about samadhi, right? And samadhi is generally translated as bliss, right? Joy, bliss, I think, right? But another translation of samadhi is in summation, because it's a math game, and it's like the joyride. You get the joyride when it all adds up, right? So to get to the state of samadhi, there's a lot of conditions, but if you can do, like, if you can put the gas in the tank and the air in the tire and the window washer fluid, which is really all movement of the breath. If you can maintain the vehicle, if you know where you want to go, if you can read a map, well, in the end, if you put all these things together, you should be able to achieve that state of being. So that's our goal.
That's our goal. And you were talking about, when we were kind of going back and forth, and you had said, we practice for health. We practice so we can be well-rounded, so we're resilient. It's not that we never get sick, but that we bounce back quicker with less residual effects, right? And so you're always saying, like, yoga is a tool. And I know from having worked with people that are unwell or going through health challenges, it's hard to remember the tools when you're sick, right? It's hard to remember to do the remedies. It's hard to get up out of the bed or off the couch, right? To remember to do the things. And so the more we can be adept at a daily practice and doing it, we know what a hammer is for and when we need to use it. We know what a screwdriver is for. So you don't take a hammer when you need a screwdriver, right?
When one is well, that is a very important time to do all your rituals, right? So that you build those habits in. So It's when you're well, you should go and wash your face with cold water. It's when you're well, you should brush your teeth as a lefty if you're a righty. It's when you're well, you should do the things that really is serving you because you're already well. And that way, when you're not well, they're there. They're still maybe familiar enough, as opposed to thinking that that's when you should do things when you're not well to get well. Right. So you should do all these things.
Right.
Yes. Thank you.
You've got to put the gas in the tank before. You've got to build your ojas, which is the immunity, right? Before. So you have that storehouse.
It's nice for these people to eventually really be able to understand that they know what it feels like when there's no gas in the tank, and that they're panicked on the highway and they should have gotten gas, but they blew it. And to understand that that is a sensation of insulin leaking, right? Because that's how a Westerner would talk about it. And then Ayurvedic practitioner would have different language for it, but it's the same thing. It's the worry, right, that eventually leaks through the chemistry. And then to know what you feel like when you put the gas in the tank, it's all gone. So that's why you need the metaphor to change someone's mind. Mm-hmm. Because, because they already have cars, so they know that.
And that goes back to the metaphysical, right? Because when you're talking about that, when you're talking about like insulin leaking, we're talking about, you're talking about the chakras and the endocrine system. And
this is why I love numbers. I'm one of those number worshipers, right? Because language is confining and language can be misconstrued, and everybody needs good language, but also everybody misunderstands each other, right? Yeah, because language there's so much in it. It can be so subjective, but numbers are they're so joyful because they just don't lie, right? They just don't lie, right? And so because of that, numbers is a very big piece of the game, right? One of the best ways to soothe somebody in breath work is to have a number count, right? Because that way you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and your mind can go up in space. And so now it's part of the, and it is a training game, but it makes you safe to know it measures up and it adds up. So numbers, I love the whole concept of knowing how to add up, knowing how to measure up, knowing how to play with numbers. So that's a very big piece. Yes, measuring up is samadhi.
Back to samadhi.
Right? In Buddhism, it's samma. It means in summation. So the noble truth is not that they're right or wrong. It's that they have to add up. So you can't be really good here and bad there, because then the wheel doesn't roll.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. That goes back to like center and circumference. And so a big part of the practice, and one of the things that I love about it is the structure and the balance, right? And so in terms of like when a structure is well proportioned, it's balanced. And when our body, our house, or our joints are well structured, prana flows all the way around.
Oh my gosh, we haven't said that in like 50 years.
Right? So people come to me with the shoulder pain. Really? Oh.
Right.
I love that. God, I thought that was mine.
That's right. That's why then butchers.
There's no pain in space. That's right. And then, so this is why I just want to talk about how the practice again, because this is where this methodology extends out into your whole life. Because it makes you measure up again. So we can go back to the summation part of it. We can go back to the angles and if you fit yourself on the mat, you're going to fit out there in society. Your house will be clean.
If you put shoes on that fit and are really comfortable all day, you're going to have a better day. Because you walk to the store and the floor is good, right? The store is good. Your feet are good. So that's why, you wear the right thing. It serves you. You put the gas in the tank all day, you can drive that car. Yes. It's all fit and measure. And right. Yes. I'm very invested in bodies as being forms that are formal and can be informed and conformed and transformed and reformed. And, initially when we're teaching asana, that's the dialogue. It's the form game that you can manipulate form. Right. So that's when I learned to play it as origami. I like to think of asana as origami for bodies and origami is asana for paper. right? And you want to make a cup, there is a technique, right? And if you start with a square and you know how to fold the corners properly, the cup should hold water. And if it doesn't mean you didn't make the effort. It doesn't mean that you were good. It means none of that. It means that somewhere you didn't know something or you missed something or you spaced out when you right. So the beauty of paper is you unfold it and you see because the habits are in there. Right. This is why good body read is not psychological. It is really a generous sort of like self-reflection through others. Having, right, seeing it in the round, right? And, oh, this is how you do the pose. This will give you a better fit. As I said, all yoga works.
It's magical.
All good technique works. So, and then there's technique that isn't so good, but it'll still work. Like a bad cookie is still good when you love cookies and you're hungry. But a good cookie is even better, right? That's it.
That's it.
And making
it
with a little kid who comes to visit is even better. And that's why you always, the goal is to win. I'm very winning oriented. I don't do things to lose, right? So, I really go for, if I'm going to bake a cake, I want to bake a cake that tastes great. If I bake a cake that tastes great, then I want to invite friends over to eat it with me. Yeah, it's like, why not win? So how to get there when you're not well? Part of it is you need others. So somebody else has to come over and bake the cake for you or with you so that the house smells good. Sometimes you need other people to clean your house with you. Yes. And that's the community part. That's the part of generosity of spirit that when you're healthy, you can. And then you can help somebody that they can't do it.
You can help someone else. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the real Sangha. That's one part or one idea or one practice from Katonah Yoga that you hope will be remembered for generations.
Okay, so first I'll start with the slogan that I just love, which is there's no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate gear, right? Which has been a very big slogan for the last 40, 50 years of the practice, because I think it was one of those mountaineering things from Patagonia.
Actually, I think it's a Steiner thing too.
Maybe Patagonia took it from Steiner, but you see everybody knows, right? Right?
Yes, it was like a Scandinavian
So
thing.
I say that one
where they needed
it brings me to that. The biggest piece of my yoga is the idea of self-responsibility, right? Which is why in that slogan, you're really being told, be responsible with your gear so that when it's raining, if you have the right gear, you're safe. If you're in the car and you put the gas in the tank, you'll be fine, right? So that idea of being self-responsible. And I think that is the goal of yoga, is to teach you how to catch your breath, how to organize your mind, how to help your body when it's in pain. So there's this very great thing that, to me, it's all about learning to be self-responsible. So I hope that's the piece. Because it's not about style. It's really about the goal, right? So that's right, because I don't think that's, I'm trying to think, well, what is the goal of some of these other types of yoga, right? I don't think they're really, not off my head, but I think that that's the takeaway I get from thinking about certain things. But that's what I like, that, it teaches people to be self-responsible and well.
I mean, it goes back to the yamas and the niyamas.
Right, yes, right. And the communal code of ethics. Because, right, yes. And yes, so I'm very into behavior. It's like the 10 Commandments. So young, I love the 10 Commandments, which is why I became a religion major. Because I'm, yes, it's very innocent, right? So yes, this true love of the universe and God, and that, it works. So I am very pancentric and panpsychic. I think the universe is alive and intelligent, and that, the organized religions that, especially in the West, are very homocentric. People like Hinduism and Taoism because they are more pancentric, but they're pancentric within their cultural boundaries, right? So being more Western, I can be pancentric, which in that open source narrative. But it's undercurrent in all of our sort of civilizations that people know that the planet is alive, that everything's intelligent, that it's not just about humanity, right? So I wanted to participate outside, right, with the greater planet and with the personal planet. And yeah.
Oh, yeah. Can you talk about great nature and personal nature?
This comes out of classic Nevine, which is classic Chinese theory. And I only say that because that's where it's so well articulated, just like Hindus articulate yoga so well, right? The Taoists articulate Neidan, which is internal alchemy, so well, how to do that internal transformation. So in the Neidan, there are two types of virtues, two visions, two great visions that everything revolves around. The first vision is that you are part of. You are part of the greater whole, just like you are a fruit on the tree, right? And you belong to great nature, right? So you don't make yourself grow, you grow because you are part of, right? You don't breathe because you make yourself breathe, you breathe because you are part of, right? And, what is greater, the superorganism around us would be our planet. So we are part of our planet. So in Chinese, the Tai Chi means the stem of a cherry, because if you think of, your planet as the tree, right? You are a cherry on that tree. So you're a fruit of this planet. So first you are part of. So the first great meditation is always to open your mind so that you are fed by great nature, right? Because like an inverted tree and the roots are fed from up there, right? The second great virtue is known as inferior virtue, and that is self-cultivation. That is knowing yourself unto yourself, your own unto yourself. So these are the two great things you're a part of and you're separate from, right? You belong to the greater whole, but right, you're separate from everything else and you belong to yourself. So these are the two great visions, right? And the goal, of course, is to mediate them, right? On one hand, to deal with the fact that you're part of the greater whole, but you're also by yourself, but also that second vision involved with that, which is not only are you mediating between the two visions, but each vision reconciles itself with the other. So you can see yourself by reflection, right, in the greater or in the smaller. So these are the two great things we play with, right? Or at least I play with. I know I'm part of. When I start my meditations, I like to start by making myself available and opening myself up and letting the grace of the universe rain down. I know that when I think of grace as rain, I know that water, rain is freely descending, but I have to know how to channel it. So that's the art. I channel the grace, and the grace is that I am part of something that allows me to be. The second piece, my practice, I start from the bottom up. And that's when I do self-cultivation. So that's the idea that now I'm an instrument of my own and it's out of tune and it's my job to learn how to tune it. Or I'm a car, or I have a car, and first when it came from the plant, it was fully loaded and now it's out of gas. And it's my job to learn how to take care of it. So self-cultivation belongs to that second vision of virtue, that you are whole unto yourself. How are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to liberate yourself? Then, and that's how I play my breathing practice, because my practices are designed on these principles. So I always start by asking for the grace of the universe, and then I play with my internal fire to make my efforts. And then I have my two great polarities of grace and effort. And the third piece of the practice is really putting together and playing in harmony. And that's the idea of knowing that the breaths, my personal breath, so rather than a box breath, it's the breath of nature, right? Instead of just a Ujjayi breath of in and out, it's the oceanic breath, tide moving in, tide moving out. So that eventually you play in harmony with personal nature and great nature. Because every plant, right, participates in great nature and personal nature. So, yeah. So that's part of that. Yeah.
I mean, it threads back to like fitting
Yeah.
yourself or fitting someone else originally, like great nature, right? Fitting someone else or belonging to something else bigger. And then that personal responsibility and fitting yourself.
These are going to be, that big math game of two, right? But the big magic is in the reconciliation or in the contact between the personal and universal, being an individual, but also being part of, right? And so, yes, it's all about tapping into both of those things and then knowing that when they make contact, it moves currency, right? And that's a huge game. That's all Chinese techniques are about moving chi. All of Ayurvedic stuff is going to be about prana, right? And really, in the Western narrative, it's pneuma, and pneuma is breath and means spirit. So when you're nomadic, you're playing with your lungs, right? And yes, the whole thing is how to bridge the personal and the great. And as you said, the breath becomes that bridge. Yeah.
Right. What are you obsessed with these days?
So generally, I'm very careful. Like, so what I build calendars. It's one of my obsessions, right? And I probably built about 10 calendars, and then I took 2 years off. I did not build a calendar last year, and I did not build a calendar for 2025. But I just completed a calendar for 2026, right? And so first, I get very focused and very obsessed when I do these things because I'm obsessive and I'm focused and I'd like to complete things. So I like beginning, middle, end, right? So calendars. I build calendars because I think calendars are canons of personal religion. When you belong to a religion, the way you know is that you follow their calendar, right? So if you show up for their holidays, you know that in a sense you belong to that community. But personal religion is personal time management. How do you spend your time? Where are you when, right? So calendars are canon of personal religion. It allows you to really see how you spend your time, right? And also how you want to spend your time and if you follow through. So it's one of my great obsessions. I just completed my calendar, right? It will go to print like in April, May, and then we'll start moving it out in September. So it's a year away. But it was a very big
We'll
thing
have you
for
back.
me.
We'll have you back when it comes
I'm very
out.
focused on it. So there's that. But in the calendar, and this is why it's part of the obsession, I spent probably, I would say, a good 15 years really learning magic squares, especially the 3x3 magic square, it's used in Feng Shui. It's used as a talisman in the West. And in classical Ayurvedic material, it's called the Kubara column, right? It is like, they're codes for magical spells, right? And they have recipes in them. Mm-hmm. So I spent a long time playing with these magic squares, right? And the first I played with it's called the Lo Shu. It's a 3x3 magic square. It's a tic-tac-toe board. And it teaches you how to divide space. And I really learned mapping and geography, right? And then I discovered another code, which is called the Hutu. And the Hutu is all about fluency, right? So I've been very obsessive about, besides numbers, learning how to break these codes, right? So the code of Trinity, which is held in that initial magic square. And this one that I'm playing with, it's the code that brings you into center through reconciliation. So I've been very obsessed with breaking these codes. Outside of that, I'm obsessed with gardening and making teepees. I make a lot of teepees.
Yeah. And her garden and her teepees are fantastic.
And then I'm obsessed with my grandchildren because now I have grandchildren. I have 6 of them. It's shocking. It's just shocking. Very grateful for everything.
And you're the testament for staying well-adjusted, well-oriented, and well-organized so you can enjoy those 6 grandchildren and the gardens and playing with your friends.
It's very important
and your
if you're
practice.
going to teach that in a sense you role model, right? And it's inspiring. So, if I'm a baker and after 40 years I don't bake good cakes, it's not okay, right? So I have been doing yoga consistently for 50 years. If my practice doesn't work, then it's not a good practice, right? We always say, if you're bitter, change your technique because it's just not working for you, right? And 3 different people can be playing with the same recipe, but it's not just the recipe, it's about them because they have to measure, they have to calibrate temperature, they have to, in the end, the recipe is just one part of the product. So I hope Katonah has very good recipes, right? But the rest of it is really, the individual, which is why people should be very proud of themselves when they make good cakes. They should be celebratory when they follow through.
We'll link to everything in the show notes. How can people find you?
I'm very easy. I'm very findable, right? I really enjoy people. I think my great strength is that I have a very open mind. And my other great strength is that I have tremendous tenacity. I'm very stable. And I really have spent my life learning to be confident and play with people, right? And now I really can. I play well with people. I like playing with people. I'm very impressed when I see musicians come in and they know how to play their instruments. They don't have to be the best, but people are talented. And then there's nothing more fun than being part of the orchestra. That's why I like being in the room now as a student, right? It's tricky because, it's a whole different thing, right? But it's a whole different thing.
It's a whole different thing. And I'm sure the teachers are nervous having you in their class.
Right. I pay attention. I do exactly what they tell me. And then I have to deal like everyone else. Now, 40 years ago, if they asked me to do a handstand in Lotus, it's nothing. But today, I would just, I don't think I'm going to do that today. Right. So, there are limits.
I'm going to watch. Nevine, thank you so much. I want to ask the question we're going to ask everyone is, if this wasn't your life work, what else could you see yourself doing? What other passion would have taken you down the same depth?
I probably would have been a scholar, right? And I think it would really be in academia because I have a huge appetite to learn things. And then, as I said, I like minds. I like minds. And so when people are interested in learning something or interested in teaching me something, I'm just so happy. That's how I want to spend my time. I like to read a lot of myth. I like to read a lot of fairy tale. I'm just going to add that for people that if you're having a hard time in life, you don't know what to do with yourself, read myth, read fairy tale, because they're your great archetypes, right? And they're stories, but then you can find your stories in them, right? So I like the fact that the universe is so smart. So I think my life work would be anything that allows me to play well and be smart.
Thank you. Well, you are a scholar, and so.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Right.
Thank you, Nevine.
Thank you. And
thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yes.
Like, subscribe, follow us.
And I'll join you again soon.
And have a beautiful day.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. Don't forget to check out our 2-week free trial for unlimited yoga, breathwork, and Ayurveda on betteryoga.net.